To start off, I just wanted to get into some background information about myself. Just give you a brief overview of my journey with severe treatment resistant depression so that you have an understanding of my experiences with it and where I'm coming from, and as far as the knowledge that I have due to the experience, not necessarily from research or textbooks. My depression started when I was about 12 years old. At that time, mental illnesses weren't something that were discussed, so I didn't know what was wrong with me, just that something wasn't right. Over time, I made 3 cries for help, each of which went unanswered, and I eventually reached a point that I just gave up. In my mind, I figured if no one else cared, then why should I? Before I gave up and gave in to the depression and just let it do whatever it wanted to do to me, I did something psychologically that is easiest for me to explain as partitioning myself off in my mind. I took the core essence of who I was, everything that made me me, and I sealed it off in a small corner of my brain and just wrapped it around in barriers upon barriers and walls upon walls to keep the depression from ever touching that. At the time, I didn't know what exactly the implications would be further down the road. In my mind at the time, all that I was doing was just protecting the core of who I was so that if things or when things ever got better, I could let that part of me out and it wouldn't have been corrupted by what was going on with me at the time. Once I had done that, I just gave up and I let the depression in. I stopped trying to hold it back and let things just take their natural course. I was able to get by. I did finish high school, just barely. I did try some college courses and I did fairly well in college. I just didn't find anything that I could hold an interest with. When I was around 21, 22 years old, I moved back from Canada. I had been living in the States for a while, so I had moved back to Canada and I started college again when I moved back. Now, I had to make the decision fairly quickly, and so I entered into the Police Foundations course, thinking that I would follow in my brother's footsteps. I didn't realize at the time, though, that there was an eyesight requirement, and I have terrible uncorrected vision. So even if I finished the course, I would never qualify to be a police officer. It was during the first semester of the Police Foundations course that my catalyst came. It wasn't anything huge. As the saying goes, it's just the one snowflake that's too much and causes the avalanche. I had been dating a girl for about 2 or 3 months at the most, and we broke up, and that was my catalyst. I just broke down. I ended up in the hospital. And that was at that point when doctors started getting involved and I started receiving treatments, medications, information on dealing with the depression, coping strategies, so on and so forth. Over the next 15 years or so, we went through every medication and medication combination my psychiatrist could throw at me. I either didn't respond at all, I had negative side effects and didn't have any positive responses, or in the case of a few, I started having a positive increase in mood. But after 2 or 3 months, the medication would suddenly just stop working, and we would just have to move on to the next. I also did go through electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, or more commonly known as shock therapy. I did 8 sessions of that, but there was no improvement, so we decided to stop the ECT sessions. Over time, I also went to what's called Homewood Health Center, and they have different programs for multiple different things like addictions and different like eating disorders and mental health. I went through the comprehensive psychiatric care program at the Homewood Health Center. At the time that I had gone there, I was on about 11 different medications. So their main focus at that point was bringing me off of almost all the medications that I was on. The only things that I was staying on was the medication for sleep, as I developed insomnia after I broke, and I can't sleep without the medication. I will stay awake until my body eventually just hits the point of shutting itself down. So I stayed on the sleeping medications, and then an important role in controlling my suicidal urges was controlling my anxiety. So I had been on clonazepam, and that was kept as well. But everything else we went through a detox with. During my time there, I also did go through different classes, different forms of therapy, such as art therapy, different classes that went into CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, but I had already self-taught myself that. There was some practice around mindfulness, and that has been very beneficial for me. It's been a very useful tool. After Homewood, there were some clinical studies that were being done, two different clinical studies that were being done at the time. The first one is called transcranial magnetic stimulation, in short TMS. And they had discovered this, people with mild depression, when they had to go in for an MRI for whatever reason, they found that for about a year after their MRI, their depression seemed to get better. And so they started looking into it, and they found that it was the magnetics in the MRI, the high-powered magnetics, that were causing this effect. And so that's where the transcranial magnetic stimulation comes in. And what they do is they use a very high-powered magnetic, and they'll start on one side of the brain, and they'll do a certain set of treatments, and if there doesn't seem to be any response, they'll switch to the other side of the brain again and do several treatments on that side to see if there was a positive response. When I went in for the consult for the TMS, the psychiatrist running the clinical study said that the type of depression I had, the magnetics wouldn't penetrate deep enough to cause any benefits. And because they were running a clinical trial, they needed people that would be optimal to see positive results. Just the nature of clinical studies, the more negative results you have, the less likely it is that that form of treatment will be passed. So they rejected me into that program. The other clinical study that was going on is called deep brain stimulation, DBS for short. And this treatment is regularly used for Parkinson's disease, but they were doing clinical studies for people who were had severe treatment-resistant depression. And what DBS is that they connect two neurotransmitters on the brain, and they connect wires to those neurotransmitters. Those wires are then run down the inside of your neck to a device in your chest. Throughout the day, this device sends small electrical charges to the neurotransmitters in the brain. However, the psychiatrist running that clinical study didn't believe that there would be great enough benefits to risk the open brain surgery of attaching the neurotransmitters and running those wires. So I was rejected from that program. Again, it was in the clinical phases of it, and I'm actually quite happy. It took a lot of convincing for the doctors to get me just to go to the consult. I didn't like the idea of something like that in my brain, especially if it didn't work, there was no removing it. So I am now stuck with this device attached to my brain and in my chest. Just wasn't appealing to me, especially if there was no benefit. So it was back to the drawing board, and like I said, we went through every medication and medication combination. We eventually reached a point of there was nothing left to offer. Wait until the next new medication came out in the market, and hoped that there was benefits. We also did try doing ketamine infusions. And this is where I had to go into the hospital for this, but they hook you up to an IV and then also to a pump for the ketamine. And depending on your weight, depends on the amount of ketamine that gets injected. But every minute for 40 minutes, you get a certain dose of ketamine that gets pumped in through the IV. It's a short-term treatment. The main usage for the ketamine infusions is to interrupt suicidal ideology. When they have someone who is very suicidal and they can't get them out of it, the ketamine infusions will often interrupt that cycle. That wasn't the reason that they put me through that. They wanted to see if there was any benefits from the ketamine. For me, I was always in a state of being suicidal. I always had the urges every day. I had the suicidal thoughts every day, the death fantasies every day. For me, it was knowing when I was losing control over the urges to follow through with those suicidal thoughts and urges. So we did the ketamine infusions. It's a short-term 3-week period, and you do it 3 times a week for those 3 weeks. I did find some benefit in mood, and it definitely did interrupt the suicidal thoughts and the suicidal urges. But as I said, it was a short-term treatment, not something meant to be long-term. So after that 3 weeks, things slowly started to relapse again and went back to normal. More recently, not last year, now that this is 2023, so in 2021, a treatment came out called Spravato, and it is an S-ketamine nasal spray. So the way that it was explained to me is that the S-ketamine is a pure form of ketamine. It's also a different strain, so I mean it's like A to B. And it's delivered through a nasal spray, so it's a different delivery system. My benefits at the time, due to my depression score and past history with treatments and medications, I was approved for the treatment, but there was a review date. So I started the treatment, I believe it was February or March, and the review date was set for December. By the time December came around, I had done a complete 180. I was experiencing emotions and feelings and desires that I hadn't felt in so long that they were beyond a distant memory. It was truly beautiful. I was driven, I was motivated, I was inspired, I felt happy, I felt joy, I felt peace. It was like nothing I could ever remember feeling in my lifetime. When the review date came, the benefits declined to continue covering the treatment. Ultimately, it came down to they declined it because my depression scale score no longer met the requirements for them to cover the treatment, but the reason that my depression scale score no longer met the requirements was because the treatment was working. So I did appeal the decision. It was a 2-month process of appealing back and forth with providing information between myself and the doctors and different forms. I was reapproved for a short period of time where there would be another review date, but this time I had hope. They said that the review date would be based on being supplied evidence that the treatment was working, which we knew it was working. So I was very hopeful that upon the review date, they would continue to allow the coverage. But again, upon review date, they again declined it, again for the same reason that my depression scale score no longer met the requirements to cover the treatment, which that alone is evidence that the treatment was working. So at that point, we pretty much only had one thing left to us, which hadn't been studied for use with depression, and that was ketamine troches. So regular ketamine in a troche form, which is very similar to sublinguals, so it melts in your mouth. But since it was off-label for use with depression, as there weren't any studies that were done, there was no guidelines to follow. The only thing that we knew was that, one, we needed to reach a dissociative state, and two, it was a cumulative effect. So it's not something that we were going to see within 2 or 3 treatments, whether or not it was helping. This would be something that would be seen over a period of months. The first trick was finding the right dose, which we eventually found at 800 milligrams. That's when I finally hit a dissociative state. We started out at once a week. It was only slowing the relapse down, so we increased it to two times a week. But again, it wasn't improving anything. It was just slowing the relapse down. So we eventually bumped it to 3 times a week, which is the maximum. There has to be at least 24 hours in between each treatment. So I would do my treatments Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We just recently increased the ketamine troches from 800 to 1,000 milligrams. That was about a month ago. The reasoning behind this is that at that appointment at the time of this decision, the easiest way for me to explain it is that it felt like the engine was trying to turn over, but it just wasn't catching. Things were trying to get started, but it just couldn't grab hold and actually get going. So the hopes was that increasing it from 800 to 1,000 would maybe give it that little extra bump, and over time we might see some changes. Now, last year I had also, upon learning that here in Canada the MAID program would become available in March of 2023 to people with a mental illness, people such as me who were treatment resistant and had been through multiple different medications and treatments, and quality of life was still very poor. I had set myself down the MAID path. I had nothing left in me. After experiencing everything that the Spravato treatment gave me in the first round and then started to give me in the second round, I just had nothing left in me to fight. There was no strength left. There was no hope left. And I was tired. I've been fighting it since I was 12 years old, and I'm 39 years old now. And I just was tired of fighting, and I was tired of being strong. And so I set myself up a path for the MAID program. However, I've never been one to completely give up. I've always had to keep fighting, and I've had many frustrated discussions with my doctors about this, that how I wish I could just 100% just give up and stop fighting, but that's never been me. I've known through all my experiences that when you have a loss of hope and you have no strength left in you to keep fighting, the one thing that can help to give you strength to keep fighting and can give you back a spark of hope that you can build upon is faith. I started my faith journey in 2010, but it was only a surface faith journey. I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I read the Bible and I attended services, but I never went into a deep faith journey for that connection and that relationship. I always said to myself, okay, I'll do it another day, because the depression just took away all of my interest and motivation and desires, that I just couldn't bring myself to start that deep faith journey. However, with the made decision, I now had an expiration date on my life, and I could no longer put off that deep faith journey. And I knew that if I wanted to live going forward, if I wanted to not take the MAID program, live and continue to fight the depression, I could no longer do it with just my own strength. I needed the strength that Jesus offers, that the Holy Spirit offers, that God offers. And I knew that in order to receive that kind of strength, I had to take that deep faith journey. And so I set myself down that path as well. And that was my main focus. The MAID program path, it ran parallel, but the path that I walked and my main focus was the deeper faith journey. And I did reach out to someone from my church, as well as the pastor for the campus in my city for my church, in order to get some guidance, because I didn't know how to start and to walk down a deeper faith journey. I didn't know where to begin. I didn't know what I should be doing, things that I should be reading, all that kind of stuff. And so I had reached out to two people that I felt could be helpful for me. Over a period of the last 3 or 4 months, it has been a battle like I have never experienced before. It's been a battle of both spiritual and physical, earthly and heavenly. I've come to a lot of understandings. I've come to a lot of realizations. And over time, I've been able to make connections with Jesus and with the Holy Spirit. And when those connections come, what I feel is beautiful, and peace and love and joy and strength and belonging. The depression always ends up severing that connection. But what I feel is worth continuing to fight the depression for the next chance that that connection comes again and I can feel it again. And over time, my relationship with Jesus has started to be repaired, and my union with him has started to become closer, and I have found strength, I have found hope, and I have found love, not only between me and Jesus, but just love for everyone else. Not love for their actions. Some people do some things that are terrible, and I don't condone that, and that's not what I'm loving. It's just love for the simple fact that they are a human being. Everything else, their decisions, their actions, that's between them and God, but I can still give them love as a human being, and from that flows everything that is good. Acts of kindness take no thought whatsoever, no effort. It's like, when you have a loved one and they need help, you just go and help them. It's the same way with people I don't know. I hold love in my heart towards them, and when somebody needs a helping hand, there's no questions about it. I just give them a helping hand. Or if they just need a listening ear, I've had strangers at work that tell me about something that's going on in their life, and because of the love that I am holding for them, I can listen patiently and hear them out and give them a chance to verbalize whatever it is that they feel the need to verbalize, and the story that they feel they just have to share with someone. And there's reward in that. That increases the love in my heart for other people, for myself, and with Jesus. And that increases the strength that flows from him and the drive to continue living. And through all of that, I have noticed that the made path that has been running parallel to me slowly started to crumble and crack and break apart, and has now become more of a mist. I am holding a very weak link to the MAID program. I think that this comes from experiencing times in the past where things seemed like they were going to start to get better, and I had some hope, and it was just all of a sudden ripped away from me, and things just got bad again. And I think that I'm afraid to fully let go of that link to the MAID program at this point. I think that I will get there through my journey with my faith and with Jesus, and I believe I will get there. It's just right now I still hold that weak link out of fear. But it is no longer something that I plan to apply for. It's definitely no longer something I plan to follow through with. I have found the strength, but there is still so much more to discover. There's so much more to learn, to understand, and such a deeper relationship to have, and a stronger union to have with Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit. So I will be speaking from both a place of experiential depression, severe depression that has been treatment resistant, and I will probably also bring in some faith discussions or some faith aspects. For those of you who aren't religious, I hope that you can bear with me through those aspects that I bring in and still get benefit from the experiential depression side of things, the mental illness side of things, as well as coping and understandings. But that's where I hope to go with this podcast. A lot of my personal stories will be revealed, and I will use analogies to help people understand, as I hope that this podcast is not only for people who are going through a mental illness, to have somebody that can understand them and that they can relate to things, but also people who don't understand a mental illness because they haven't been through it, that through these stories and through these analogies, it can help you understand and go beyond what medical websites and textbooks teach, because they only touch the surface. They don't go deep, and they don't properly explain just what is going on inside of your mind and how things are being changed, and what that process actually looks like. So I just want to say thank you for listening in. I know this podcast session was a little bit longer, but I wanted to make sure that you had an understanding of just where I was coming from, some of the things that I've been through, and that my experience, my knowledge that I have to offer is coming from experiential, and it's coming from a severe side of things that a lot of people don't experience to the severity that I have. So that's where my expertise comes from. Again, thank you for listening, and I look forward to the next podcast session.